I feel like people have different coping mechanisms. And I feel like, either we go into our primal brain, and our primal brain is like fight, flight, or freeze, right? And this can happen throughout any sucky moment when we're having a conflict with a partner, or when we heard that client's no longer going to sign up with us again because of this current state of economy, or that another client, because of protests going on in certain parts of the world for women's rights, uh, they no longer want to invest in themselves because they're afraid. And so we fight, flight, or freeze. That's what our nervous system does. And so that's one camp of people. And another camp of people is like, all right, well, that sucked. Now what? Now what? What am I going to do? And I think most of your listeners fall into the camp of, well, that sucked. Now what? Really fast. Like, there is no in between of, well, what's the middle ground, and what's the bridge between the part that sucked, so that sucked, right? And the now what part, which is the part two, which is the actual action. What's the bridge that I'm building between that sucked and now what? That vulnerability piece that's often missing. It's one of the reasons why I was so moved and inspired to write the book, especially around, obviously the climate that we're in is different, but the initial climate was COVID. And to verbalize just that statement, or those two words, that sucked, the vulnerability in which we say, wow, I'm actually feeling stressed right now. I'm actually feeling sad right now. I don't even know what I'm feeling, but I know I'm not feeling good right now. To acknowledge that and sit in the discomfort, us high achievers a lot of times don't really know how to do. Why? Because we're on to the next thing. We're on to the next, and we're so on to the next until something else comes out of nowhere, like a medical diagnosis, like maybe a fall, literally or figuratively, like a medical situation, or you wake up and you're feeling burnout or super lethargic or just stuck in your own funk because you've never asked yourself, how am I actually doing right now? Do I really want to say yes to this thing? Do I really want to say yes to whomever comes my way? Because I don't know what I'm going to get, because there's so much uncertainty that I have to say yes, even though I know this client might be a red flag for me, even though I know working with this person may not be the best, but I'm going to say yes to it. Why? Because I have a big vision for my life, and I see what I want to create. And so, I think that for those of us who are in the camp of high achievers, high performers, usually what we would do is we would bury things that don't go well. We'd bury it under a rug, shove it under a rug, shove it in a closet, and go on to the next thing, because we're like, okay, we've got this. Yes, we have the tools to do it, but are we actually bypassing, many times spiritually, what we're actually feeling, thinking that, okay, if I do the next project, if I do the next thing, I'll forget whatever happened, instead of actually pausing and saying, wait, hold on, checking in with myself and asking, okay, how am I actually feeling about that my team member slighted me, or that my friend who promised me that they would be there for me actually ghosted me, or didn't even show up, or didn't even care to call. When we have these human things that will come up that cause us to be human and to explore our humanity.
For example, let's say if somebody is going from that now what moment, you said the transition is really fast. What does especially I'm talking in context of coaching, mostly because coaches tend to go, okay, positive thinking, let's move. And sometimes that could mean, like you said, that you've not fully acknowledged what that sucked could mean or can be the experience of. Why is it important to feel it?
So when, in a coaching container, when we're allowing ourselves, or even suggesting to our clients, right? Again, context. If we're constantly focused on the next action step or the next thing, but they're going through a really big life situation, a life initiation. Their loved one just left them, or something monumental happened. They lost their job, or they lost their main source of income, or a big client fell through. However you are coaching your clients, or maybe even yourself, most of the time, and this is for so many of us, most of the time we don't want to sit in that container of discomforting feelings because it feels uncomfortable. And this goes back to, I think in the last time we talked a little bit about what the bounce factor is. And I talk about this in the book heavily, the first part. And most often we are not integrating how we actually, or taking even a look into what we were like or how our upbringing was. And our upbringing is one of the 4 parts that actually build up your bounce factor, your ability to bounce, not break, like a strong glass right there. If I were to take a glass right now and let it go, it would shatter in a million pieces. It'd be all over the carpet, all over the rug, everywhere. We'd have to clean it up. But it's strong, right? We say it's strong, it's tough. It's not going to break. Well, a glass will break. If we take a bouncy ball, which we all carry because, we have our kids, but if we have our bouncing ball with us, it's rubber, it's tough, but when we let it go, it bounces. And the ability to be agile, the ability to bend, the ability to flex when things don't go our way, we're not taught that. So when I bring up this concept of the bounce factor, that's one of the 4 key parts, right? So we have to look into our upbringing. Now, our upbringing, we have to ask ourselves, well, how were emotions, how were our feelings discussed, if at all, when we were growing up? I mean, how were your feelings in your house? Were they even talked about?
No.
In your house?
No, I come from an Indian family from India.
So what does that?
We don't talk about feelings.
I know, but what does that even mean?
What does that mean? You don't talk about feelings. That's what it means. I don't know what you mean by that.
Well, okay, fine. So to give you an example, we talked about feelings, but it was, growing up, I was always told, Neeta, you're a big girl. Big girls don't cry. And I'm pretty sure both of my brothers heard the statement from my parents, big boys don't cry. Boys don't cry. Don't be a girl. Man up, right? We've heard all of these phrases, but because as a society, we're not taught to feel our feelings. We're not taught that it is safe to actually explore what crying even means, because it would mean that we're broken, like the glass that we just shattered. And so if we're not comfortable, and for me, I mean, just in my own experience, because I was told, Neeta, you're strong, you're tough. So when I went through all of my losses, my mom, my dad, my brother, because of that, I internalized that I have to be strong, I have to be tough. So there were points where I would completely swallow my tears, suppress them so much that then a decade later, it would come fully crashing down on me. And I'm giving a big example here. And of course, I think that for many coaches in their containers, it'll probably land a little bit differently, and hopefully it doesn't have to be that extreme. But I share this example because for me, it was huge. It really ran the beliefs and the thoughts that I had in my head of what strong looked like. So when I was actually, in this very tumultuous and toxic relationship, I didn't even want to ask for help. I didn't even want to ask, is there another way? Because I was so afraid of being labeled as broken, as the glass being shattered. But the greatest liberation came from me saying, I can't do this anymore. I need help. To actually say I need help. To actually say, I am feeling so sad right now. To actually feel the feelings. To actually integrate it. And to notice what parts of ourself is actually coming up. And it was that little girl in me that all she wanted was that validation when she was allowed to cry. And I think for a lot of us, when we look back, so I would probably say to the audience is, look back to see what in your upbringing were you told was okay. Because I remember we've talked about this as well, right? Your mom would give the 4-finger tupper, like, okay, if you're going to cry again, I'll give you something to cry about. And this is common throughout culturally. And or if we see a young child crying, even our elders would try to give a candy to our son to make him stop crying. So we're then priming our children that crying is not okay, that feeling sad is not okay, that feeling mad and angry is not okay. So I want us all to think of what were some of the emotions that were not okay in your house. And now as adults, what is not okay? What are you not allowing yourself to feel and express? And because I've now had, many conversations bringing this up in closed door talks and talks on stage, majority of people are not okay with either two things. They're not okay with expressing anger, because even as good girls don't get angry. That's not polite. That's not posh to get angry, right? You're then labeled as a bitch if you get angry. God forbid you share what those emotions look like, but that's the spectrum of humanity, right? And the other aspect is most people are not okay with sadness, which is why then we get to the action. We get to the now what. We get to the now what of, all right, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And here's where, it becomes an issue, is where we've sat in the suck for too long, right? And there's some of you listening to this thinking, well, I've had some of those clients where they've been in that healing phase for a very long time, not just 1 month, not just 2 months. It's been years. And while it's great for my coaching practice, I want to get them into a state of action. Why aren't they taking action? They seem like they have to, they're constantly going back into the spiral of the suck. That's where then we talk about taking action.
It's like our friends that have done 7,000 ayahuasca ceremonies and they're still discovering something. It's very interesting that you're saying, and it's present to me, or at least that's what I'm feeling right now, is that what you're really saying, at least in this part of the conversation, is that we need as a society is to start getting comfortable with the discomfort of sitting in an emotion. And we don't need to chase to end it. Of course, we don't want to prolong it either, or know when the limit is, but we definitely don't want it to be like, all right, stop crying or stop being angry or stop being this or stop being that. We want us to be able to fully be expressive of what's happening so we are in tune with what's actually happening. Would you say, sorry.
No, I mean, absolutely. Yes, and because if we think about it this way, and this is the analogy that I've been loving recently, it's so imagine, right? Imagine we have a pot of boiling water. Let's just say it's chai, because we both love chai so much. And I've got burned from chai when I was in India one time, literally running into the, chai, and it was getting served on a tray. And basically I ran right into it. So then the tray table comes up and the chai falls into my arm, and literally I get a 3rd-degree burn, and it was sizzling. So I know that is the gravity of the pain when you actually have hot boiling chai on a stove. Now, if we think about it in this way, in that story that I just shared, I had a 3rd-degree burn. Literally my skin was sizzling after that piping hot chai hit my skin, right? So imagine we have a boiling hot pot of chai. Well, if we put our hand in it, what's going to happen? It's going to sizzle, and the skin is probably you'll probably burn your skin off. So, but that analogy of the hot boiling water, if we turn it off, we take it off the stove and we wait for it to cool down, we're actually in many ways paying attention to that pain point. We're not going to put our hand in it right away so that we could burn. But that analogy of the boiling hot chai is analogous to what's the discomfort that's coming up. So we have to shut off the pot. We have to shut it off, move it. And in many ways, we're moving the pot of chai so that it can cool off before we pour it into a cup. But the act of doing that is paying attention to the emotion, paying attention to, why am I feeling jealous right now? why am I feeling like I'm not good enough? Why am I triggered right now? Why am I feeling so angry by the comment that they said, or the comment that I read on Instagram, or the email that came back from this client that doesn't want to work with me? So that's the analogy of that pain is an indicator, the pain of the discomfort of, ooh, well, that really sucked that they said that. That's that boiling hot water. That's the impetus for you to say, oh, it's time to move the pot. Take the time, look at it, let that boiling, hot stove calm down a little bit so that we can ask ourselves some reflective questions of, well, how am I playing a role in this? Or what else do I need to heal around this? Because this is still a trigger for me, or that really landed not so good for me. What is it telling me more about? So pain is an indicator, right? The pain that we want to avoid, the discomfort that we want to avoid from these really big feelings that we're so quick to swipe on our phones, that we're so quick to jump into the next relationship, that we're so quick to get the next gig and get the next job, even though we're not even doing the work and thinking, is that the kind of job that we want to get? Or is that the kind of client that we want to get next? We're not doing that part of turning the stove off.
That's true. That's true. It reminds me of a conversation that I had in one of the Q&A calls with coaches, some of our certified coaches. And one of the coaches asked a question, which is like, what do I do if my client does not stop crying? If we get on a coaching conversation, we hit a thread, and they start crying, and now they don't stop crying. And my reply to that, or my response to that, was let them. Because like you said, if the pot's hot, it's boiling, there's no point trying to maneuver it. Let the pot be turned off, let it settle before you lean in and start your coaching dialogue. Because right now, they're boiling, piping hot. You're going to do anything, you're only going to burn your fingers, you're only going to burn your hands. So don't do that.
It's going to be piping hot.
Take a minute. Yeah, take a minute, slow it down, let it settle. And there was, and at that time I reflected, I was like, if you let somebody just cry, like have a good cry out, 10 minutes, 20 minutes maybe? Like even when Ari goes into his meltdown, if you just let him out, like if Ayla gets into her moment, let them out. 5 minutes, maybe.
Well, that's
they just let it out, and then they're like, all right, now I'm ready to talk. It's so much easier to have a conversation than trying to tell them, quiet. They like only keep boiling up more and more.
Well, I mean, that's societally, we've been told to suppress our feelings. We've been told that we can't scream and get angry. We've been told that we can't cry. And I would go back to whoever asked that question. Well, how does it make you feel that your client is crying? What were you taught growing up about crying, that it's not okay for them to express a very human emotion? Because without the cry, without the sadness, like the movie, if for those of you watching who haven't seen that Pixar movie, Inside Out, oh gosh, it's such a great movie. I think it's like my all-time favorite.
It should be a default watch for every coach.
It is, yeah, seriously. That and Soul, the movie. Yeah. So for those of you,
and for every kid, really. And for every adult too.
For those of you parents out there who are coaches, I highly recommend Soul and Inside Out. And Inside Out because it teaches emotional intelligence to like a 3-year-old, and the way they break down the concepts, it's just so easy, because of course you need sadness and joy. They go together. It's the duality of both the human spectrum. We're not meant to just be laughing all the time, right? If we had sunshine all the time, then we would not appreciate the rain when it comes. Or if we had rain all the time, we wouldn't appreciate the sunshine. Ask anybody who lives in the UK. They love the sun, right? When it shows up, they love it. It's like a party. And so, it's the contrast. It's celebrating and honing in on the contrast. And so for any coach who is uncomfortable, or they feel like, oh my God, what's going to happen if my client cries? That's the full body release of emotions. And there's there are somatic practitioners out there who actually lean into where emotions get stuck in the body and how we actually can move those emotions. I mean, I love this so much that I put it in my book because I think it's so important. And of course, having a 2-year-old who flails and bumps his head and moves up and down, they are the purest form of a somatic release party just on the floor. Because if you've ever seen a 2-year-old meltdown, it is literally what we probably should experience. You only experience it in like closed doors at a retreat or something like that, where you're doing some sort of a release practice. And I use this as a funny example because it is true. We don't allow ourselves to shake it out. We don't allow ourselves to move the energy because an emotion is really, as we already know this, it's energy in motion. So if we are sitting in a corner, not allowing ourselves to cry, getting so bottled up, getting so much tension, and somebody says, don't cry, it's going to be okay. What else were we told when we were younger? Oh, you're going to be fine. Something better will come along, right? We probably have a whole list of those slurs that somebody would say when you're going through a sucky moment. But can't we just reframe the dialogue? And for all of you coaches, I'm curious to know how you hold space for your clients. If it is just being silent and creating that safe container, we say hold space in the woo community, right? But it's just to be present. What is coming up? And for you, as somebody who needs to actually create a safe container for your clients, if they are crying in front of you, that means you've allowed a safe container to happen. If they are sharing their most intimate, vulnerable feelings with you, that means you've done your duty, that they are going to go even deeper. They're going to explore some of their edges. They're going to share even more. And so allow, because like you said, with any emotion, we're moving it through our body. And most of the time, don't we feel a little bit better when we've let out a good cry? Don't we feel a little bit better when we could just like get up and, I've done this at a few of the EverCoach events, but stomp out the suck. And we go through, it's like a whole 5-stage practice of embracing the suck, anchoring the suck, accepting the suck, moving the suck, transforming the suck, and releasing the suck. And there's a few different ways where we activate the vagus nerve, where we activate your rest and relaxation nerve, where we are also calming our nervous system. But we have to do all of these things. So absolutely, my goal for this book and for everyone listening really is to normalize those conversations, to say, actually, that sucked. And now what? And to be sitting in that moment of discomfort.